A pleasure to be here with Jael Silliman. Welcome to Kolkata Literature Festival. My first question is about the session that you're about to be a part of, which is very interestingly called the Identity Quotient. So, what do you think about identity in today's world? Do you think that we are actually getting more polarized or divided, or it's just that because of social media, because of the nature of communication, the old prejudices are actually getting a chance to arise and surface?
I have a different approach to identity. I have always seen identity as a way in which people, especially people who are marginalized and don't have power, can get their voices heard. Otherwise, they get lost in the general din. So, for example, in this session, we have Barry O'Brien who will speak about Anglo-Indian community. It's a community in Calcutta with a distinct identity, a community that really isn't there so much present in Calcutta today. And there are lots of misconceptions about the Anglo-Indian community. So, in his book, for example, he throws light on the contributions of Anglo-Indians, the history of Anglo-Indians, the political storms through which they've navigated in order to survive and thrive, both in India and abroad. So I think what he does is, through identity, is able to build a voice for that community. Similarly, Nilanjana's book, Bhaumik book, she's a journalist and she writes on gender and feminist issues. And women have to organize on issues of identity. And she looks at the current situation and challenges facing women. And it's the identity of women. What does it really mean in modern India today? So I think that will be very interesting too. And then we have Lucy Hanna, who's also speaking. And she comes from a different perspective. She gives voices to a group we don't usually think about, of people who are in conflict zones, both men and women. But today she'll talk about women, especially in conflict zone. And her books actually enable them to speak for themselves. So I look at identity politics as not as divisive, but giving voice to people who otherwise are often lost in the mainstream.
To what extent do you think that providing a voice for marginalized communities actually helps build empathy? And to what extent is that empathy required for greater empowerment? Because what happens is often in the media narratives that we do get, they do touch upon stories of minorities or stories of marginalized people, but it's done from a distance. You almost can at best feel sympathy, but not really be in their shoes. So, would you say that empathy is therefore a means of empowerment? And maybe that is exactly what these stories that all the panelists have is going to achieve?
I don't think about identity necessarily about building empathy. I think it's about building understanding. It's about getting to know them from their own perspective and hearing from them their own voices. For example, I'm from the Jewish community of Kolkata. We're barely 30 Jews left in Kolkata today. But at 4,000, when we were here in the city, we were a formidable force in all aspects of life. So when I write about my community, it's not for empathy, it's for India to know what is the role of micro-minority communities in shaping and building the India of today. So I think it's, in some instances, women don't need empathy. Women need understanding. People need to know how much women work. People need to know that how much burdens we carry and how we pull the nation forward. So it's not about empathy. It's about giving women the respect that they due given their contributions. Now, in some instances, even Anglo-Indians, people think of Anglo-Indians as a marginal community, but actually they're very important in the building of modern India, and especially in the field of education. I don't know where you went to school, but I went to a Catholic convent. There's Anglo-Indian school guidelines that were formed, and it's because of the excellent education that we receive from Anglo-Indian institutions that we are who we are today. And so we have to acknowledge that. And in Barry's book, for example, he talks about the roles of Anglo-Indians in education. So I think, whilst books could be about empathy, I think it's more about understanding and knowing their histories and their contributions.
It's about the acknowledgement, right? That is what builds everything. It starts from there. So let's talk a little bit about the Jews, and the Jews particularly with respect to Kolkata. You said that once there were hundreds and 4,000, but now we've come down to 30. Yeah. So what would you say has been the major reason for this decrease in number of the Jews? And if you have to identify one or two ways in which Jewish people have contributed most prominently to Calcutta and its history, what would they be?
Okay, so let me answer that question. Is that it's important for you to know that in India there are many communities of Jews. We are the Baghdadi Jews of Kolkata, means we are a Middle Eastern community, and it is called Baghdadi, but it includes all the Jews of the Middle East who came and settled here from the 1790s onwards. In fact, my ancestor came here in 1790 from Surat, and he looked at the commercial opportunities that were here and brought other people to the city. Now, it's important to know that India is the only country in the world that has never discriminated against Jews. Jews have prospered across India except in Goa during the Inquisition, where they were persecuted and burnt at the stake by the Portuguese. But otherwise, Indians have never done that to Jews. So it's important to see how India has always welcomed people of all communities, including the Jewish community. So why did we leave if we were always so welcome here? So our community in particular came in 1790 during the time of the British. And when they were here, they knew what British rule was all about. In 1947, they didn't plan to leave India, but there were many global forces that impacted the Jewish community. For example, World War II was there. Okay, many American soldiers and Jewish soldiers, British soldiers came here. They married Jewish girls. But many of their cousins who came from Burma and Singapore came as refugees to Kolkata and moved to America, and they took their Jewish wives with them. We also had England recognize that those who came from India could get Commonwealth citizenship, and the richer Jews could take their money out of India with them. And it was not only Jews that left India at that time, a lot of Indians also left India at that time. Israel was formed. Okay, there were partition riots in the city. Nehru was talking about the nationalization of banks, and Jews were suddenly in the midst of the trauma of World War II and was happening outside. Suddenly felt, what if things shift very dramatically in India? What will our future be like? And so many of them chose to leave with a community of only 4,000, and with the richer leaving and taking their economic strength with them, and they employed many Jews. Soon, by the time I grew up in the 50s and 60s, there were only 700 Jews left. And now when I returned to India 10 years ago, only 30 left. So what are some of the contributions? They're too huge to mention, but for example, a lot of the major iconic buildings, including Esplanade Mansions, Charangi, these are all Jewish buildings. At one point, Sir David Ezra was one of the major land owners of Calcutta. They were in charge of, for example, money, and they were major traders in the city. In terms of women, because I'm a feminist, people don't know the contributions of women, but the first woman to fight for women to be in the legal profession and to represent them as lawyers was Regina Guha. So there were women trailblazers, there were women in the film industry, there were major photographers who were Jewish, the judges that were Jewish. So they actually played a major role in shaping the city in many fields of endeavor.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for sharing your insights, and have a great time at KLF.